we'll start the show then.
Yes, I think we should eventually start the show.
Welcome into another D3 Datacast. It's our first show of 2025, but it is our 100th overall, another important milestone celebrated here on the D3 Datacast during the 2024-2025 season. And of course, we are so grateful for everyone in the Division III basketball community who has made us a part of their D3 Hoops experience.
Zach, when we started this show, I wasn't sure if we were going to make it through 10 episodes, but now we've gotten 100 under our belts. It's been fun to do this. It's been fun to talk Division III basketball, and I'm glad that people have followed along and had some amount of enjoyment out of our silly little show here.
We have fun with it, and we hope people have fun following along with us, Matt. This has been a fun season, and I'm sure as a top 25 voter, this was a very fun, maybe fun in quotes, ballot for you, because it's been a few weeks since we've had a fresh top 25. And I think the landscape has really changed. In particular, a couple very recent results with the current number one Emory taking a loss at Christopher Newport, another undefeated team who maybe was in contention to maybe be number one. Trinity, Connecticut also took a loss the same day, just a couple days ago, Saturday afternoon, losing at Babson. Matt, so I'm not a voter. I don't have to make a decision here, but as I was thinking about it, I was like, this is going to be really interesting to see how the number one votes come out. Because if I were a voter, I'd probably, despite the loss, be looking at Emory, NYU, Trine, and UW Platteville. I think would be the four under strong consideration for me. I could also see maybe Trinity, Connecticut getting, despite losing at Babson, still getting number one consideration, given that it has been a long stretch of time since our last poll. And I think taking all of that into account, you maybe don't want to hold the recency of that Emory loss and that Trinity loss against them compared to, hey, if you're going to consider maybe Platteville or Trine, who do have losses just because they happen at a different place on the calendar. I don't know that you want to hold the recency against those other two teams. So really looking in totality, it's kind of interesting to look at those results with Trinity and Emory and think, yeah, I think they still very well could be in the mix for number one. As an actual voter, Matt, how are you approaching the top of your ballot? And, do you agree with that list of teams that I thought of? Was the list bigger or smaller for you?
Yeah, no, I agree generally. I think so. On the screen now is my list of teams, and I think you can basically consider maybe more or less I think my top four were really the teams that I was considering for the number one, and I did leave Emory in that number one spot. So I left Emory number one. I left Trinity, Connecticut number two for me. Trine is number three, and NYU was number four. Those were the four teams I was thinking. I think one of these teams is number one right now. Now Wesleyan and Platteville are my number five and number six, and I think maybe they're in the mix, but for me, not quite. I think UW Platteville is getting themselves back into that mix. Wesleyan, they're undefeated. They've played well. I want to see them get into a little bit more of their difficult portion of their schedule. So even though I'm ranking them one spot above Platteville, they're not really in the number one mix for me right now. But yeah, Emory and Trinity both took losses this week, but they were both on the road against pretty good teams. And it's not terrible at this time in the year to be taking your first loss in the new year. A lot of teams have a loss already, so that doesn't really, like you mentioned, Trine has already taken a loss, Platteville has already taken a loss. So just because it was recent doesn't mean it's really worse than any of those other losses out there. I did give NYU a lot of thought. They're sitting at 11-0. They have some good wins under their belt. I think the best one now it might have been their opening game against Babson. I think Babson's a better team now than they were maybe in November. In November, they were kind of maybe all over the place. Their last three games, I'm talking about Babson here, about as good as anyone in the whole country. So I think they're a better team now. NYU played them early in the season, which I don't want to really ding NYU for that. But other than basically what I want to see out of NYU is get away from home a little bit more and playing some of these good teams. Emory lost on the road. Trinity, Connecticut lost on the road this week. But it's really close, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I did kind of stick because to me, Emory and Trinity were kind of above everyone else. And now maybe the loss just brings them back to kind of make it more of a pack right now.
Yeah, and, so you would have Platteville out of the group that I mentioned, and with Wesleyan ahead of them. And I left Wesleyan out because of that schedule. I feel like they haven't played the schedule some of those other teams have. They are undefeated, but I feel like with that schedule haven't put themselves in harm's way as much
Yeah.
as the rest of that group. And Matt, here's my early season hot take, I think, is that you mentioned Platteville does have a loss, and it was not a pretty loss. They
No.
lost big time in that Sigma Invitational Championship game. But here's my early season hot take: is that I think what we saw on day 2 of the Sigma was at least in part influenced by the game that Calvin and Platteville played against each other. I think when you look at what Calvin and Platteville looked like on day 2 of the Sigma, I think it was very similar. And so that's my hot take. I'm not saying that, on a different day, maybe the result wouldn't be different. But I think the margin may have been. And so I don't think that was a bad loss by any means by Platteville. Maybe the margin makes it look worse than you would like it to see. But, hey, we like to have fun with some hot takes on this show. And that's my hot take from the early part of the season.
It gets us in trouble sometimes. And yeah, Platteville's my number 6, and they've gone on. That was game 2 of the season for them. They've gone on to win every game since. They had a really good win at UW Stevens Point this past weekend. That's kind of sets themselves up on top of the WIAC race where we thought they would be. Now it's early in that WIAC race. There's a long way to go, but that gives them kind of a leg up. But yeah, I didn't immediately have them in that number 1 mix, but I think they're getting there. Like right after the opening weekend, that big loss to Illinois Wesleyan, Platteville, who had been up in the top 2 for me preseason, I really dropped them out because a big kind of like double-digit loss like that early on really dropped them out for me. But since then, they've been building momentum. They've been building back in. And I now have them up above Illinois Wesleyan, who is still in my top 10, but, beat them head-to-head like with that big win. But at this point, now Platteville's total results for me have them a few spots higher.
Then going beyond Platteville, Matt, you have Hampton City 7, Randolph-Macon 8, a pair of ODAC contenders there. Worcester, which took their first loss at the hands of Babson. Sometimes we talk about who won the week. I say, Babson
Yeah.
certainly won the week. Um, Trinity, Connecticut, and Worcester now a combined 23-2. Both of those losses to Babson this week.
Yeah.
Heck of a week for the Beavers. We'll get to them. They move into your ballot at number 23, and as you mentioned, Illinois Wesleyan finishing out the top 10. Take us from there.
Yeah, number 11, Wash U. Number 12, UW Lacrosse. UW Lacrosse had what was at the time and probably still is a big win against Keene State. Keene State came out to Wisconsin to play a couple games and lost to Lacrosse and lost to, I believe, Oshkosh was the other team that they played.
Decisively.
But both games handily. But I think that's still overall really good wins for those two UW teams. So Lacrosse is still hanging out there at number 12 for me. Tufts is a team that I'm not quite sure what to make of. They did lose to Nichols on a neutral court I want to say this week, but it was the 30th. Maybe that still is this week technically. With Christmas and New Year's, I forgot what day of the week we are most of the time. That was a 1-point loss, but Tufts I think still has a good overall record, 12-2. They still have some overall good wins in there. So a 1-point loss against Nichols. I didn't really drop them too much for that. They're still kind of in the teens for me. St. John's 14, Catholic 15, Wisconsin Lutheran 16. They put up some good results over kind of holiday break there. A win over Trinity, Texas, a win over Augustana. So things are looking back up for Wisconsin Lutheran. They're standing at 11-1. WPI at 9-2. They are number 17 for me. UW Stevens Point. Christopher Newport at number 19. Newport was the team that beat Emory this past weekend, so they have a really good win there under their belt. Hamilton at number 20 is another NESCAC for me. I think I'm fairly heavy on the NESCAC, but Hamilton is looking fairly strong this season. Stockton at number 21. They did take a loss against York, Pennsylvania over break. That was an overtime loss, but that's not the worst. So I dropped Stockton. I think I had them in the teens last ballot, and they dropped them to 21. Denison is a new arrival for me at number 22. They've had some good wins, and they have a good overall record. I'll see what kind of a contender they might be in the NCAC this year with Worcester. I think maybe they're the top 2 teams, or I'm pretty sure they're the top 2 teams there, so that'll be a good race. Babson at number 23, you mentioned them winning the week. They've had about a good as stretch as anyone. So since the last ballot, they beat Case Western Reserve on a neutral court by 14 points. They won at Worcester by 8 points, and they won at home against Trinity, Connecticut in double overtime by 10 points. That's a pretty good stretch for Babson. I think they're finding themselves now, and they might be a mainstay on my ballot for the rest of the season. And then rounding out the end, a couple of Region 10 teams, St. Thomas, Texas at number 24, and Redlands, who win, I think, 3-0 out in Vegas for the D3Hoops.com Classic. They are at number 25. Redlands is looking good out of California.
So we expect the new top 25 sometime Monday afternoon, early evening, as it usually comes out. Man, I think we could be seeing 5 or 6 different teams getting at least uh, one number one vote. It's going to be an interesting one to see.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if the ballot is a little bit delayed this week. I don't know. I know Pat Coleman's out at the Stag Bowl doing D3 football championship stuff on Sunday, so he's got to get voter information out and collect ballots back and everything. So we'll see when that comes out. But I know he's really busy with overlap season's tough on everyone.
Absolutely. So it seems like it's, whether you're looking at, the top 5 or the top 10 or all the way throughout the top 25, Matt, it seems like it's a pretty close race. And that's what this episode is going to be all about, close races, Matt. This is the time of year that I traditionally think of as turning the page from non-conference season to conference season. Of course, some of the larger conferences need to get conference play started earlier in the year, and so there are some conference games that have already taken place, but I think this is the traditional start, right? We got coming up this next weekend, we've got our first NESCAC conference games, our first UAA weekend with the travel partners meeting up, and a lot of the conferences that are 8 teams or fewer that play the double round robin will be getting started this week. So Matt, we want to take a look at some of the very best conference races, what we think are the tightest conference races. And the way we're going to define that, Matt, is a little bit different than maybe you've seen us do the last couple of years. This has been, kind of become an annual tradition for us to take a look at the tightest races, this kind of episode. But we're going to do it a little bit different this year. Instead of looking strictly at the spreads in overall computer efficiency margin, Matt, we've used those. You've used those to simulate the season 1,000 times, and so we're going to look at what those season simulations turned out to be, and define the conference races, the tightness of those conference races based on the championship odds over the course of each of those 1,000 simulations.
Yeah, so on the screen now is the tightest conference that it looked like when we ran those simulations. It's the SCIAC, Southern California Intercollegiate Athletic Conference. And Zach, as you said, I took the rest of the regular season, the schedules we have in place, ran it using the efficiency ratings with some random dice rolls to figure out who maybe won games and lost games based on how good the two teams are in the games. Figure out who could be the champion over those 1,000 simulations. And if you share a championship, then you're the champion. So if you look at the first place totals and the championship percentage, it's going to add up to more than 1,000 and more than 100%, because in a lot of cases you might have split champions. Like, that's part of what makes a tight conference race, is when you might share a conference championship. So the SCIAC is one of the most interesting. 41% of the time, 41.2% of the time, actually, Claremont Mudd Scripps won the SCIAC championship there, or at least claimed a portion of the championship. And 39.7% of the time, Redlands won the championship. So that's only, 1.5% percentage point difference between those two, 15 simulations difference. But it's not just a two-team race. Cal Lutheran was right there, 38% of the time. They won the conference championship. And then it doesn't even stop there. Chapman won 17% of the time, and there was even some simulations where Pomona Pitzer won the league championship. That's 5 out of the 9 teams. More than half of the teams in the simulations had won the league championship. That makes a really tight race. The interesting thing here is, even though CMS won more league titles than Redlands did, on average, Redlands tended to win slightly more conference games. So I don't know exactly what's under the hood there. Maybe what maybe there's some either some interesting matchup factors that are going on, or you get a random 2-0 against the team, and that gives you a league title. Whereas over the course of all the simulations, Redlands was maybe a little bit more consistent. Maybe Claremont Mudscripts was a little bit more up and down. But yeah, really tight race, up and coming in the SCIAC here for sure.
Yeah, you look at the spread between first and third here, Matt. That's going to be tighter than some of these other ones that are between first and second as we look at on the
Yeah.
list. And that's what really makes an interesting conference race, because when it's really a two-team race, a lot of times what you're coming down to is someone going to gain an advantage in those head-to-head games, right? It gets really interesting when you've got a 3 or 4 or 5 team mix that, it's going to be about a lot more than just those head-to-head results, or um, like a two teams that are way ahead of the field. So this is going to be a fun one to watch. And Matt, this is one I think we knew coming into the season would be very interesting to watch. Of course, we had the opportunity to join the guys on the Not Even D2
Hmm.
podcast before the season, and this is the kind of thing we were previewing, some of the interesting races or things that we would have our eye on. And I mentioned the SCIAC as one of those really tight races where it's going to be a two-team race. And so here we are, at the start of January. And last episode we had the opportunity to talk about some things we were wrong about, and happy to be right about something here with the SCIAC looking as tight of a race as we thought it would be coming into the season.
Yeah, and the SCIAC is one of those leagues that has already started play. It's Chapman actually out in front at 3-0, but then Claremont Mudscripts is 2-0, Redlands 2-1, and Cal Lutheran 2-1. So some games already in the bank. These simulations account for games already in the bank. So that's already in stone a little bit, but still a lot to be played. And even though Chapman is sitting there at 3-0, the computer thinks that they're not quite as likely as the other schools to kind of continue on in that direction. Although they do have a win
Right.
over Cal Lutheran already.
Right. And that's good to point out, right? So this is a combination of simulation from here on out, but also takes into account some of those results that are already baked in. So when you look at, the what looks like a kind of an interesting result with Redlands with the 12.5 wins compared to Claremont Mudscripts Grips with a
Yeah.
12.4, maybe that has to do with the games that each of those teams has played so far. And if it's going to be a big deal going forward. Anytime a result turns from, who knows, a 60-40 matchup, by the
Hmm.
time it's played, it becomes a 0-100. We talk about that's a big deal in shifting odds, because eventually everything turns into a 0 or 100. But right now, uh, very much up in the air. You might even know who the better team is, but the better team doesn't always
Yeah.
win, and how those results turn into final results really will shape ultimately what happens. Moving on, number 2 on our list of the tightest conference races. Matt, you already made mention to it in our top 25 discussion. It's the North Coast Athletic Conference, and Matt, this is a little bit more of a two-team race between Denison and Worcester. But you look at the list there, almost a 30% chance that Wabash wins the league. So this is also looking like another three-team race.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely Denison and Worcester have the most to say about this. I think Wabash, as you said, is not completely out of it by any stretch of the imagination. But it's going to be about those top two teams, Denison and Worcester, what they can do down the stretch. Right now, the computer's seeing Denison winning about zero point 0.2 games more than average. So, as you mentioned when we were talking about the previous conference, it's going to come down to those 60-40s, those 50-50s, which direction they flip. And the head-to-heads, for sure, are going to matter a lot. So I think the first Denison versus Worcester game is, if I can look it up quickly while I talk, January 22nd, we're going to have a big one. And then again on February 19th. So those are going to be the really big games. If someone can go 2-0 head to head, that's obviously going to make a huge difference. I think we're breaking new ground in mentioning that kind of analysis here. But this is going to be a great one to watch. But then also, what do you do against the third place and the fourth place team? That's a big deal too. Do you drop games to someone that's not right around you, hoping that you don't drop a game to someone that's in the bottom of the league? Or is it just going to be Worcester and Denison beating up on everyone and then, just taking care of business against everyone else and splitting their own games?
And you can see how this one would be shaped by the conference games played to date. Matt, Worcester is sitting at 4-0, Denison 3-0, Wabash 3-0, but then there's a gap in the current standings down to Ohio Wesleyan and DePauw at 2-2. Everyone below that. So really, in what we've already seen, it's really kind of separated towards a 3-team race. You don't want to make too much judgment off of, basically 3 or 4 games played so far. But
Yeah.
that's, what we're seeing here in the overall championship odds is kind of reflected in the early part of the conference schedule standings.
And so far, those top three teams not having played each other, obviously they're both.
Right.
There's all three of them are still undefeated in conference play. So all of their maybe most difficult games are still ahead of them. Going to swing the odds a whole bunch once those games actually happen.
But shout out Ohio Wesleyan sitting in the "so you're telling me there's a chance"
Yeah,
section there with one of the 1,000 simulations coming out with them. Well, I mean, let's be honest, probably sharing a conference
could
title.
be. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about number 3, Matt. It's the Skyline, where Farmingdale State is a favorite. In the 1,000 simulations, they won a conference championship 63.9% of the time. Yeshiva number 2 at 55.9, and then a huge drop down to SUNY Maritime at 6%.
Yeah, we like to talk about the Skyline a lot on this show because it ends up being an entertaining conference, even if it's not the best conference. But there's usually some competition at the top for things like who's going to be the number one seed or the league championship here. It's Farmingdale State and Yeshiva. This is more of a classic two-team race. I think these two teams have been battling it out for several seasons now atop the Skyline. Wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to these two teams once again. Maritime and Sarah Lawrence not necessarily completely out of the picture, at least how the computer sees it right now. But really, we're talking about single-digit odds for those two, and it's going to come down to those big Farmingdale State versus Yeshiva head-to-heads because the computer's both liking them at kind of the exact same average computer record over the course of all the simulations: 13.8 wins, two losses. So 14-2 is what the computer expects. Can you sneak an extra win? Can you not? Can you avoid dropping that extra loss? Keep yourself up there. We have 1,000 simulations here, but we're only going to play out one real actual season ahead of us. And I enjoy the tuning into the occasional Farmingdale versus Yeshiva head-to-head matchup. I will admit that.
And coming into the season, prepping for our way too early conference champion draft, Matt, I was having a really hard time in my mind trying to come with any separation between Farmingdale State and Yeshiva in terms of expectation. Which, in the course of the way that our contest is set up is fine as long as there's co-champions, no matter who you pick, um, you get credit for.
Yeah.
But I really was treating this one like a 50-50 chance, and with both teams over 50% odds. Of course, as we've talked about, that's going to happen with the possibility of co-champions here. Uh, I don't at this point, I don't think I have really any reason to feel like this is anything other than a coin flip between these two.
Yeah, and I think they only play one time this year, so
Yeah.
there's no chance to split it then. So that could end up being almost a tiebreaker game, is that head-to-head game. Any split championship would mean you had to drop a game to someone else. So that game's going to carry a lot of importance there when that happens. I think it's late January. I
It's
don't know.
January 29th
Okay.
at Farmingdale. Yep.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Let's talk about number 4, Matt. Another conference race that's gotten very interesting. It's the OAC. We talked about this one, in our things we were wrong about episode because I made John Carroll the very first pick, my first round pick in our way too early conference champions draft because I would have been shocked if someone other than John Carroll had won the OAC outright. But of course, uh, the outlook for the John Carroll season changed a lot with Luke Chacon going out with a pretty significant injury. I don't know if there's a chance that he returns at all, but he's going to be, missing an extended period here. And between that and some other OAC teams looking pretty good earlier on, maybe Heidelberg, you talk about Ohio Northern looking a little bit
Mm-hmm.
better maybe than we thought coming into the season. The OAC is really a wide open race. Not surprised to see it here, Matt. And based on the simulations, here to date. Heidelberg, Mount Union, Ohio Northern, really really strong chance, pretty even. Even with Heidelberg at being 48% uh, championship odds. But Matt, there's another group there led by John Carroll and Otterbein, and even Marietta, making this I think a pretty interesting. 6-team race, giving 6 teams at least 1 in 20 odds to claim at least a share of an OAC title.
Yeah, and by the time you start talking about six teams, the odds start getting slimmer because you're dividing it up so many different ways, right? If it
Right.
was completely even with 6 teams, you wouldn't even have 20% odds for any single team to win it. So that's why the odds start getting thin. But the thing that jumps out to me on this slide, talking about the OAC here, is the projected champion Heidelberg on average ended up with 5 conference losses. 13-5 was their average conference record. This is going to be it's a great conference every season. It's always really deep, but I think this year there's not this far and away champion like it looked like maybe John Carroll was going to be, or maybe that they were last year. Let's just say they're going to beat up on each other a ton. The computer sees that. I'm sure there's every chance that there's going to be a split championship, but every week, I don't know what their schedule is, like Wednesday and Saturday, whatever their conference schedule is, you're going to have a game on your schedule that's going to drastically impact championship odds of either you or someone else in the conference race. Teams are going to take a bunch of losses. Again, if you can, you're going to have to protect home court. If you can steal a road win or two, then you're going to put yourself that much better than everyone else, because this is just so hard to win games. This in the OAC, I think is one of the most emblematic conferences in all of the country in that respect. If you can, especially if you can win conference games on the road, it's so difficult in a good and deep league like this. Those are going to have a big impact on your ability to then go on and win the league.
And in the current standings, Mount Union is 4-0. Everyone has at least one loss. Though let's see if I can look real quickly, Matt. I don't know that Mount Union's really played. Okay, they do have a win at John Carroll, so that's a good win
Yep.
in conference and a win over Otterbein. So it's a couple, already two wins over teams kind of in that 6-team mix. But we'll see what happens going forward. But this is based on knowing that Mount Union's off to that 4-0 start and everyone else having a loss.
Yeah.
But pretty solid there at 33.2% chance for Mount Union to win an OAC title. Yeah, I not surprised to see this on the list, Matt. This was one of the leagues I was really looking forward to seeing, just the way that it's opened up here, this season. So going to be a fun one, another fun one in the OAC, as it's always a battle, Matt. It's always a battle, but instead of like a muddled middle, I think there's a really muddled, legitimate, championship group there.
Yeah, and this conference is so deep. Even a team like Wilmington, who has a good chance of maybe finishing last in this conference, has given other teams fits in this league. I think it was last season, they went 2-0 against, was it Mount Union, something like
Yeah.
that. And just the other night that they were giving John Carroll difficulties, at
Yep.
least through the halftime. I think it was a close game. I think maybe John Carroll pulled away in the second half this past weekend. But there's really it's one of these conferences, there's really no days off. So you got to come to play against everyone.
Absolutely. Yep. And we mentioned John Carroll, and the significant injury they've suffered and had to adjust to, but they've actually adjusted pretty well, and they're certainly not being written off by us or anyone else here. The computer simulation still has them pretty, pretty much in the mix. We've seen what they can do winning at Hampton Sydney. So definitely not writing them off, but I think the outlook has definitely changed, where I would no longer be shocked to see someone other than them,
Yeah.
as an outright winner. We've
Well,
talked about that before, but here it is in number form.
so here's what John Carroll, they in the game that Chacon got hurt, they lost to Johns Hopkins. Then they lost to Emory, they lost to Mount Union, they lost to Ohio Northern by 1. Since then, they beat Marietta by 4, beat Hampton Sydney on the road by 13, beat Washington and Lee by 25, and they beat Wilmington by 18. So I think maybe they found, all those games that they played without Chacon have been pretty difficult, but I think they found something recently, and I would not be surprised if kind of this new John Carroll we found ourselves then can make some noise in the league. Shows them fourth here. Again, no one's taking them lightly or writing them off. They're going to be right in the mix.
I'm not giving up on my first round pick there, Matt.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, number 5, Matt. Totally different dynamic as we take a look at the new Mac. Of course, we've talked a lot about Babson already. We've talked about WPI, another team in your top 25. And I tell you what, the new Mac is shaping up to be, a pretty good race here between Babson and WPI, but based on the simulation results, that's about it.
Yeah, I thought Clark would be right in the mix this season in the new Mac. So far, that hasn't really been the case. It's been Babson and WPI. I think WPI was a team I expected to be strong. Babson was a team I wasn't quite sure of. They've been really hot lately. I think I read through their recent results, and it's been as good as anyone in the country. And right now, they're maybe the marginal favorite in the new Mac, according to the computers here. WPI, obviously, right on their heels. Looks like a bunch of simulated split championships here. If you think that there's 1,000 runs, I see just easily over 1,200 championships in there. So it means more than 200, almost 250 of these were split championships. So a lot of opportunities maybe that they will tie atop the standings. We're not trying to do tiebreakers or anything here. If you split your championship, you get to put hang a banner in your building if you want to do that. But it's been a little bit more of a difficult road for Clark, I think, than I expected. And I think that's the biggest surprise to me in the new Mac overall. They've played some tough games. Just looking non-conference here, because this helps to set their efficiency ratings, their team strength. They've lost to St. Joseph, Connecticut. They've lost to Nichols. They've lost to Middlebury. They've lost to Tufts. They've lost to St. Lawrence. So some difficult games in there, but games you think maybe you can win, 3 or 4 of these, and they happen to go 0-5 in all of those. The conference slate has started, and Clark is 2-0 there. They've beaten Wheaton, Mass, and Salve Regina, who are projected to be at the bottom here. So they have their more difficult games to start it. But for now, they're starting 2-0. So we'll see if they can get back into the new Mac race and build a better resume, improve their computer ratings as we go.
But a big advantage in those games already played for Babson, Matt, they were able to defeat WPI already this year. So if you're looking at this in terms of a two-team race, that rematch later in the year is maybe kind of like a must win for WPI if they're going to try to claim at least one of those pretty frequent shared titles, as you referenced in the simulations.
Also, still already have a loss to Emerson. So again, even though it's a two-team race here, it's a conference that someone's going to come up and bite you too. So you got to watch out.
Yep. For sure. Okay. Next up, in the Northeast, Matt, it's the GNAC, where St. Joseph, Connecticut has 59% odds, followed by St. Joseph's of Maine at 40.9, Albertus Magnus at 20.8, and LaSalle at 16.5%. A little bit different dynamic than we've seen from the GNAC in recent years.
Yeah, St. Joseph's Maine is a team that we talked about as far as like teams on the rise. A few episodes ago, we looked at teams who have been outstripping their preseason projection or what they've done the last couple of seasons. The GNAC has been a conference that's been mostly St. Joseph, Connecticut, with Albertus kind of trying to poke in here and there for the last several seasons. That's kind of the case right now as well, but St. Joseph's Maine has inserted themselves into that group. And here in the simulations, winning almost 41% of the league championships here. So there's a pretty tight race at the top. There's a pretty good top 4 here, so it's not just that it's St. Joseph's or Albertus or even St. Joseph's Maine. There's a pretty good top 4 here that have some shot at winning, so it'll be an interesting race. I think part of that is that St. Joseph they're not like the number 2 team overall that we saw 3 seasons ago or whatever. They're not the top 25 team that we saw the last couple of seasons. There may be a step back from that, but I think maybe the rest of this, there is a top group that has taken a step forward as well. So the GNAC is not just a conference of also-rans like maybe they were. I think that there's maybe a solid grouping here up at the top of the GNAC.
And if you look at the total number of simulations in which any of these teams finish in first place, Matt, it looks like another one shaping up to have a lot of scenarios where there's a shared title.
Yeah.
Very emblematic of what you might expect in a tight conference race.
Yep.
Number 7 on the list, Matt, we go to the UMAC, where North Central is a favorite in terms of the simulations from here on out, followed by Crown, Northwestern of Minnesota, and UW Superior. And Matt, kind of surprisingly, Bethany Lutheran there is with some championship odds, but just a 1.5%. And then Minnesota Morris is the only other team here in the UMAC. Although you got to give it up for an 8-team conference having 6 different teams show up with a first place finish in the 1,000 simulations here by the D3 Datacast computer.
Yeah, the UMAC isn't a conference that we talk about a ton on the national stage. It's not one of the elite conferences nationally. But here, it's going to be a little bit of an entertaining race, I think. Bethany Lutheran was a team we talked about early in the season as maybe having separated themselves from the group over the last couple of years. But here we see maybe that's not the case anymore. They've brought themselves back to the pack. They're maybe more of the in the middle of the league. And it's a team like North Central. It's a team like Crown, actually. And Northwestern Minnesota is a team that's been in the mix in there as well in previous seasons. So any one of these teams can win it. North Central winning in just over half of the simulations, but there's still another 600 or so below them in which someone has won or split a championship here. So it's kind of like North Central versus the field 50-50 split here as far as can they win it? Can they win outright, or can they split a championship with someone in there? But if you're looking for an entertaining race, I think the UMAC is one to not take lightly. We'll see if their champ or their conference tournament champion for the Pool A can go in and make some noise in the national tournament or not. But as far as its own little race here, I think that's going to be a really exciting one to watch.
Another exciting one to watch, Matt, always is the number 8 team on the list here of the tightest conference races, the CCIW, where Illinois Wesleyan took a home loss to Carthage, but they remain the most likely conference champion based on the 1,000 simulations of the D3 Datacast computer. Uh, not ready to quite call it a two-team race based on these simulations between Illinois Wesleyan and Carthage, Matt. But they're the overwhelming favorites at this point. Augustana and North Park also showing up there with just a less than 1% chance for North Central and then Milliken.
Yeah, and an interesting dynamic in the CCIW right now as it stands. They've already played, I think, 4 conference games, and it's actually North Park who's out to a 4-0 lead in the standings. And so they're sitting on top. They've already banked 4 wins. Illinois Wesleyan, who we see here as our top projected team, they're 3-1, but their loss is to Carthage, who's the next team down. So there's there's what we think of these teams, there's what we can simulate of these teams, then there's what has actually happened and what will happen. I think the CCIW is one that's been almost a little bit not upside down on what's happened, but we've gotten some maybe out of the ordinary results based on what we think about team strength already right on. We saw Carthage lose this past weekend to North Park. So always a difficult conference to win in, especially to win on the road. We've said that a lot. What's going to happen these next how many games do they play? 16 games, so we have like 12 games to go, I think, in the conference. It's going to be a fascinating game or a conference to watch. 3.5 projected wins for Illinois Wesleyan. They already have 1 in the bank. So are they going to lose 2 more? Are they going to lose 3 more? What's going to happen there? If they lose maybe that second game to Carthage, that's going to make the conference race really, really interesting. They're going to want to avoid that for sure. I think it was the home game that they already lost. So having to go on the road and win what might be somewhat of a must-win game, that's going to be difficult.
Absolutely is. The CCIW is always a grinder. Uh, it's a 4-0 start for North Park, Matt, but of course, you think about all the great teams who have not been able to get through a CCIW conference schedule undefeated. A lot of the CCIW folks like to remind you of that. And there's just going to be losses in conference play. That's the way it goes. That's pretty much the nature of any conference, certainly the CCIW, and that's what makes it fun to watch.
And to run down the list for North Park, their wins so far 4-0. It's Milliken, it's Wheaton, it's Carroll, and then it's Carthage. So it's kind of 3 of the lower teams, and then it's Carthage, who we thought was right in the mix. So you don't want to quite dismiss North Park as well. They just played the lower teams because then they jumped up and bit one of the kind of top 2 competitive teams as well. So will be fascinating as always. One of the best and deepest conferences in the country year in and year out, and it's going to be another good one this year.
And we've seen in the past how, what you consider, the bottom tier of the CCIW, you go play at their place and they can bite you. We almost saw it with Illinois Wesleyan needing overtime, needing to survive regulation
Wheaton
to get to overtime and then, to knock off Wheaton. So yeah, you can make that point about North Park, but hey, there's nothing wrong. There's no need to apologize for having some of those other games already in the bag. Couple more to talk about here, Matt. We move on to number 9. It's the Centennial, which really gave us one of the great conference races a year ago. A great 4-team race between Johns Hopkins, Swarthmore, Franklin, and Marshall. and Gettysburg. And, based on the simulations run for this episode, is, pretty much a pretty good four-team race between those four again. You can also add in, some under 10% championship odds for teams like Muhlenberg, McDaniel, even Ursinus. Matt, yeah, the Centennial was a lot of fun last year and should be a lot of
Yeah.
fun again this year.
Yeah, and I almost feel bad for Franklin and Marshall and Gettysburg in that this conference has been Johns Hopkins and Swarthmore for so long, for a big stretch of seasons. Last year was that tight four-team race, but then it was still Johns Hopkins and Swarthmore in the conference tournament championship game. This year looked like Gettysburg was getting out to that big start, like maybe they were going to put their stamp on this season. And we don't want to say that the book is written on the Centennial Conference race this year by any stretch, but still, it's Johns Hopkins and Swarthmore looking as good as anyone, putting themselves right in the mix. But I think it's going to be wide open. 51% of the time, Johns Hopkins takes home at least a share of the crown. But yeah, like you said, SWAT, Franklin and Marshall, Gettysburg right there. I think the biggest surprise to me is that it's Gettysburg that's fourth by the computer projections right now. I think maybe this conference, have they already played some Centennial Conference games, Zach? I don't know if you've looked into that or not yet. I think no, they have not. They've not played any conference games. So this is pure projection, pure how good do we think the teams are, and how are they going to go through the season. It is unbalanced schedule though this year, I think,
Yeah.
for the first time. So that could play big into just look at your overall record, and if you just take your champion by wins and losses and percentage, someone's going to have to play Johns Hopkins only once. Someone's going to play Swarthmore only once. So that can make a big difference at the end of the season.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a little bit surprised Hopkins is there at the number one with the division they're in. Um, it's Dickinson, Johns Hopkins, Franklin and Marshall, Gettysburg, and McDaniel. So of that top group, Swarthmore is the one who's in the
Yeah.
other half of the conference. There, you might, based on those names, you might think that that kind of gooses Swarthmore's odds a little bit more. So a little bit surprising there. But I think Gettysburg is maybe a team that the computer has not been as high on as human voters,
Yeah.
and so maybe that we're seeing that dynamic play out a little bit here.
Well, and it's been a little bit of a rougher stretch for Gettysburg. Their first maybe 8 or 10 games, however many, was great, but then their last four is they've lost to Salisbury in overtime. They lost to Mary Washington by 10. They beat DeSales, but only by 2. Then they lost to Stockton by 11. So after a great start, which included wins over teams like Ohio Northern and Hampton Sydney and Maryville, Tennessee, has been a little bit more of a slow going for Gettysburg. So they've dropped a little bit in the computer's eyes here in the last couple of weeks.
We're going to make this a top 10. So we've got one more conference to talk about, Matt. It's a conference that we've talked a lot about so far this season, and it's the NESCAC.
Yeah.
Trinity, Connecticut has emerged in the computer ratings, and based on that, the simulations here as the NESCAC favorite. They win at least a co-championship 62.8% of the time, followed by Wesleyan. Matt, we talked about them. Wesleyan off to an undefeated start, but maybe not as tested in terms of the strength of schedule as some other teams. 41.7% championship odds for them. And then a little bit of a step down. You got Tufts at 14%, Hamilton, a team who's moved into your top 25 at 11.7%. Amherst, who the computers really liked. We talked about them earlier in the season. Probably computers like them a lot more than human voters, but so we're seeing that perhaps here 5.6% conference championship odds for Amherst. Matt Williams sixth here, just 2.5%. Not what we're used to seeing out of Williams. But again, there's something popping off here for teams all the way down the list. Colby 0.5%, seventh. An eighth team, Middlebury 0.4%. Bowdoin number 9, 0.3%. Conn College is 10th, Matt, but 0.2% odds of a championship here. Probably some of that is due to the single round robin nature, and you get a team once. Hey, you pop off a win in that game. That's a huge advantage over that team. You don't have to worry about maybe dropping the return game. So I don't know. Maybe that has to do with a more wide open playing field. But of course, the NESCAC is usually a very deep league, a lot of capable teams. So no doubt that plays a dynamic here.
Yeah, in an 11-team league, it's rare to see some first place odds for 10 of the 11 teams, and then the 11th team popped into second place once. But I think we're definitely seeing here the single round robin nature. If you're in a 90-10 matchup with maybe one of the best two teams in the conference, you can win that game once. It's hard to win that game twice, or whatever you might need to do to win the conference if in a double round robin. So if you're Connecticut College, 2 out of these 1,000 simulations, you just had, you rolled double sixes every single time, and you were hot, and you just won. Played maybe above yourselves, but you can do that in 10 games in the way you can't do it in 14, 16, 18 games, or whatever these other conference schedules are. It's a bigger conference, so a single round robin, isn't always the worst, but I think, you're seeing the effects there. You only play Trinity, Connecticut once, so if you happen to beat them in that 90-10 matchup, well, that's really good. If you happen to beat them and Wesleyan in both 90-10 matchups, then hey, you got pretty lucky. You're pretty good. I think we're definitely seeing that factor here in play to give odds to so many teams. But we're talking about less than 1% there below Williams and only 2.5% for Williams. So I think it's really coming down to Trinity, to Wesleyan, to Tufts, and maybe to Hamilton. I think they're going to be. I think we're in a wild scenario, a wild simulation if we're into any of those other teams down below them.
Yeah, any of those teams down below, they probably, need to win 3 of the 4 games against those top 4, and then they kind of flip the script and vault themselves into that territory. But Matt, I mean, just look how flat the average records are. You know, you get down to that Amherst Williams level, 5.4 and 4 and 6 for Amherst, 5.1 and 4.9 for Williams. And then you look at Colby, Middlebury, Bowdoin, and Conn College, all projected for, on average 3.6 to 3.7 wins. So it's going to be not only the head to head between those teams to see who maybe turns out to be more like 5 or 6 and who turns out to be maybe more like 1 or 2. It'll be interesting. I think there's a lot of, you get into a middle portion here where I think there's a lot of 50-50 coin flips.
Yep.
That's going to really, which simulation path are you going down to? Half the time you're going down this path, half the time you're going down this path, and you just kind of, take those branching paths. And, on average, it looks very tight, but as it plays out, it'll be very interesting to see which way it could go, because this suggests that there's a bunch of teams that could go all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the 50-50 nature of a lot of these games. And that's because the NESCAC has a bunch of good teams in it. And I don't want to say it's all just the small sample size of a single round robin, because Connecticut College is a pretty good D3 basketball team, and they're down here at number 10 in the NESCAC. They can beat a bunch of teams. You're not surprised in the NESCAC if anyone beats anyone, because they're all good. It's one of those good deep conferences like the CCIW, like the ODAC, like the UAA, and that has a lot to do with it too. It's usually not a whole bunch of 90-10 matchups that you have to get lucky to win. You have some odds of winning these games, and you have also odds of other people beating up other teams. So you're probably not just going to get one team trying to go 10-0 in conference play or something like that. Probably teams are going to take 2 or 3 losses. So if you happen to steal a win or 2, then you might be right up in there in the mix with them.
That was a fun look, Matt. I think, sometimes we get too caught up in the conversation about who's making the tournament, this or that. And then, of course, with conference tournaments that determine who wins the automatic bids, I think sometimes it diminishes the accomplishment of a regular season conference title. Yeah. And I think we need to celebrate that more. It is an accomplishment. Yes, a regular season conference title may not directly get you into the NCAA tournament, but that's what conferences, by and large, have decided they want to do. But winning a conference championship is still something worth celebrating and worth, paying attention to these tight races. And so it's a lot of fun to maybe use something like this as a guide to point our attention to where some of the best conference races may be.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. If I was a coach, which I am decidedly not, goal one, if we're talking about on-court goals for our team, win a conference championship, that's always number one. Rather than get into the NCAA tournament or get to the Final Four or whatever, win your conference championship. That's more of what you control. That's beating the teams around you. That's establishing your program. I think that's always goal one. And I agree, definitely celebrate those. I think those are important. Those are big milestones. And it's great for all these teams and programs when you can win your conference championship.
Now the big question: who's going to win a picks championship, Matt?
Well, let's see. Let's review this last week and see what we're doing, shall we?
Let's do it.
Game number one was Cairn versus McDaniel. The line was 2.5. McDaniel was the home favorite. They won that game by 8, Zach, so I get the point. Our second game was Hamilton at Stevens. Hamilton was 3.5 point road underdogs, but they won that game by 11 points. Zach, you get that point. Swarthmore at Pomona Pitzer was one of these cool cross-country matchups that we get over New Year's. I had Pomona Pitzer. They were 1.5 point favorites at home, but they won that game by 13. So they cover that line, that computer line, and I get that point. UW Platteville versus UW Stevens Point to kind of kick off WIAC play. I think that was the first game of WIAC play, if I am not mistaken. Maybe it was the second game, actually. Anyway, Platteville was 1 point road favorites. Zach, you took UW Platteville. I had taken the Pointers. But it was UW Platteville who won that game, and I think they won that rather decidedly. We don't have the final score on the screen, but they won that game, and you get the point. And our game of the week was actually a great game. Trinity, Connecticut, and Babson went to double overtime, but Trinity was 5 point favorites by the computer heading into that one. And it was Babson that won by 10 in overtime. And so neither of us pick up, double overtime. So neither of us pick up that point there. We both go 2-3 on the week last week. So Zach, you go to 18, 25, and 2. You sink a little bit further below 500. And I hang a little bit above at 22, 21, and 2. Let's go ahead to this week. This week, first game is St. Norbert. They are 9.5 point road underdogs at Wisconsin Lutheran. Zach, as is tradition, you pick first.
Yeah, 9 is a big number, Matt, but I think Wisconsin Lutheran is up to the task.
All right, you're picking the big line at home. St. Norbert was a team I just saw in person as we recorded yesterday. They lost here at Calvin, but I think 9 points is just too big. I don't think that the spread between St. Norbert and Wisconsin Lutheran is going to be that big, even though it's on the road for St. Norbert. I think that they're going to stay within 9. This is going to be the most important conference game for both teams, so I think this is going to be a lot of emotion. It's going to stay close. Going out to the Pacific Northwest, Lewis and Clark, 1.5 point road favorites at Whitman. Zach, what do you like?
Yeah, man, I was looking at this one, and I feel like if I'm eyeballing results to take, I should be leaning Lewis and Clark. But Matt, when you get into a home team in a conference game with a line like 1.5, I feel like you're getting into pick'em territory. I'm gonna roll with the home team. Give me Whitman.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Whitman as well. I think at home getting points, I think that's, in a tough league like the Northwest Conference, I think that means a lot. So I'm going to take the home dog in this case and say that they're going to be able to keep this close, if not win it outright. Third game goes out to the Landmark. It's Drew, 6 point underdogs at Catholic. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, big one in the Landmark here, Matt. I'll be honest. I think I could see this result going either way. So give me the 6 points. That's enough points to work with.
Okay.
I'll take the points with the Rangers.
Yeah, this is a pretty big line, and I was kind of scared of this line, but then I decided I think Catholic is looking for a little bit of a revenge. Last year, I think it was Drew that beat them on their home court by a big margin. And I think it was Bob Quillman that was tweeting about it, about how Drew looked great. Drew was a team we expected this year to maybe be on top of the Landmark. But I've been impressed with Catholic's results so far. I think that they're going to use this game to make a statement, and I think that they're going to cover the 6 point computer line at home. Our fourth game is Ithaca and Hobart going out to the Liberty League. It is Hobart 1.5 point favorites at home. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, similar one. I'm just going to be deferential to the home team here, and close enough to a pick'em game. Give me the home team in conference play. Hobart.
All right, I will go opposite of you on this one. I'm going to pick Ithaca. I like the way the Bombers have played this season so far. It's a pretty tight line. You're almost picking the winner outright, not quite. But in this case, I'm going to go with the Bombers here in Ithaca, and I think that they can. I think that they can win this game outright. And then our game of the week going out to Wisconsin once again. It's UW Platteville, 1 point favorites at UW La Crosse. Zach, who do you pick in this game?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to go against my reasoning again on some of these other picks, Matt. But I'm going to go with Platteville here on the road at La Crosse. Yeah, we talked about Platteville does have that loss, but it's been a while now. I feel like Platteville is playing pretty well, but we've also seen when La Crosse is on top of their game, they can I think they can play with anybody. So it's just a matter of what each team is going to look like on that night. But absent knowing exactly which version of each team is gonna show up, give me Platteville.
Yeah, I'm hoping this game is late enough that I can catch the end of the second half after Calvin's game on Wednesday, because this is definitely one that I'm having on my calendar. But I'm going to take similar reasoning as you. I think Platteville's been playing really well lately. I think they can cover the 1 point line. This is going to be really important for both teams. Platteville already has that one really good win in the bank against Stevens Point. This is the other top team in the WIAC here. If they can win this, go 2-0. I wouldn't say they've put a hammerlock on the WIAC by any stretch of this early, but they would have won two of their most important games already. This being on the road, even, I think Platteville's going to come prepared. Not to say La Crosse isn't, or that La Crosse isn't in the mix, but just a 1 point line here. I think Platteville is ready to seize kind of their preseason expectation right now, and I'm going to pick them to cover that 1 point line.
Yep, absolutely. And Matt, because we can talk about as we were putting together the top 10 list for the closest conference races, I think you asked the question like, well, where's the WIAC? And as we were kind of talking
Mm-hmm.
through it, there has just been the one game so far, but Platteville getting a win at Stevens Point is a huge result that probably, if you run the simulations with that before that happened versus after having that win in the bank,
Yeah.
that could be the difference in, the WIAC being one of the top 10 tightest races that we talked about today and not. If you talk about probably the three biggest games on Platteville's calendar or schedule for WIAC play, it's going to be at Stevens Point, at La Crosse, which they've got here coming up this week, and then maybe at Oshkosh.
Uh-huh.
Not that you can ever expect an easy game in the WIAC. It's always tough to go on the road. It's you're going to get some really good teams coming into your place, but taking any of those teams that we expect to be real contenders in the WIAC, and being able to bag wins on the road is really going to set you up for success moving forward.
Yeah, and this game right here is if you ran the WIAC odds, let's say La Crosse wins it and you run the WIAC odds, I bet it'd become really tight. Maybe they would become a top 10 conference if we looked at this next week, depending on who wins this one for sure. So yeah, these are the big games, the 50-50 games we talked about a lot that can really swing the odds. Once you go from 0.5 to 1-0, it can make a big difference either direction.
For sure. Should we go on to the mailbag? We got
Yep.
a few mailbag items here, Matt. We'll start with this one from Mike Navarre. Do home losses improve, or I'm just going to open this up even more, Matt. Do losses in general improve over time under the NPI formula if the team you lose to goes on to have a good season? Seems like it would due to the SOS factor.
Absolutely, yes. So all of your games, none of your games in NPI are static. So it's not at the time you played them. It's always live through the end of the season. So if you play a team, maybe you lose to them, and they're maybe only so at the time. Maybe they were 3-3 and you played them early, but then they go on a huge run and they win like 18 more games in a row. Then yeah, that win looks or that loss looks a lot better later on the season, because that kind of, as you said, strength of schedule factor, their NPI goes up and that goes into your calculation. So definitely root for all of the teams you played to keep winning, because that just makes your NPI better. So yeah, those games, win, loss, home, road, those teams that you already played, your score will improve as their NPI improves.
And just for to highlight how NPI works, your overall NPI score could change even if you don't play
Mm-hmm.
or any team that you played didn't play, right? I mean, it all works off of one cohesive data set. So as long as there is one game that was played involving an opponent that somehow interacts with any of your opponents, even if it's the opponent of someone you played, of someone you played, of someone you played, down the line, uh, just a single game, that will change your NPI because the whole data set changes as long as there's one result that it's some
Yeah.
distant way interacts with your
In
schedule.
some small way, if Husson plays Maine Farmington, that's going to affect Illinois Wesleyan and Wash U way over on the other side of the country in a small, tiny way, right? Because you're probably talking about degrees of separation that are huge. But yes, anyone who's played anyone who's played anyone who's played anyone could infect your NPI. But the more directly they've played you, the more it will impact your NPI.
Right. It might be minuscule, but as long as there's some connection, however many links down the schedule chain, it could change.
And like you said, those recalculate anytime anyone's played any game, so those numbers can change. Next one.
Next one, Matt. It's another NPI question coming from Danny Quinn. Great to get to meet him when St. John's made the trip to Grand Rapids for the Great Lakes Invitational. So here's another scenario for NPI purposes. Two teams I've played are playing each other. We beat one of them and lost to the other. Sounds like a Kelvin Hope question. Should I be rooting for the team that beat me, Kelvin, to win and raise an NPI to make our loss look better? Or hope, that's an interesting word, for the team we beat, hope, to win to make our win look better?
So I think this answer is it depends. We're going to be good data analysts in here and says it depends. So two factors might come into play. Two big factors. One is the team that you beat maybe in position to start receiving a quality win bonus, which is I think 50. Is it 53? Is the men's basketball dial? It's either 53 or 54. I think it's 53 in men's basketball. So you want to root for them especially if their NPI is getting above that 53, because you'll start getting bonus points for that win over them, quality win bonus. That will help your NPI more than just the marginal gain in their NPI. If otherwise, like in general though, it'll kind of cancel each other out. You beat a team, you lost to a team, one's NPI is going to go up, one NPI is going to go down. It'll cancel each other out. But the quality win bonus might help you a little bit more than it otherwise would. The other consideration is the team you beat, are they bad? Like if this is a Calvin Hope question, then neither of these teams are bad enough. But did you beat a bad team that you're maybe hoping to drop that once your minimum wins threshold is kept? So it's a win that's kind of dragging down your NPI. If that's the case and you think that game will be dropped, then you might want to root for the team that you lost to, because that game is not going to get dropped, and you want that NPI score to start looking as high as possible. So I think two things. Is this a bad win and we might drop this win and it's going to become irrelevant, in which case you vote for the team you lost to? Or is this a quality win bonus team that we want to keep winning so that our quality win bonus keeps getting higher? So if this is specifically a Calvin and Hope question, I don't know that it is. I think that's your guess, Zach. If it is, then you want Calvin to win, because right now Calvin is a quality win bonus team for you. No, sorry, they beat Hope, right? Hope is not a quality win bonus team currently. So I guess they theoretically could become a quality win bonus. So it probably doesn't matter if it's a Calvin versus Hope question. It probably doesn't affect your NPI too much. You probably though are rooting for Hope, because maybe they could down the line become a quality win bonus team if I'm correct, that they're not currently. Maybe they are, actually. I don't know. But
well, Matt, let's throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in here, because there's the matter of waiting, right? So if you're playing, if one of those games was a neutral court game and the other was a true road game, you might actually want to.
You want the neutral
You want
win.
if it was a neutral win, that would have greater weight on your NPI than a road loss. So you might actually, in that case, want the team that you beat on a neutral court. So that's you're right. To add to more of the answer of it depends, right? There's different weighting on games depending on if it was a loss at home or a win on the road, and whether it was conference and non-conference. But I think it's maybe kind of splitting hairs in terms of that game. Mostly what you want to have happen is for these two teams to win as many games as possible outside of the games against each other.
Yeah.
That's really what you want to root for. And then for the head-to-head, I don't know. I mean, if it's a head-to-head between a team that you play in conference twice,
yes,
and a team that you played out of conference once, then the team that's going to be on your resume twice, you maybe prefer to win. But yeah, in general, I think it's less about the head-to-heads and more about what those teams that you play do in the rest of their schedule. You want those teams to win as many games as possible.
Yes, I think in the random head-to-head matchup, quality win bonus or dropped win aside, the gain from one team and the drop for the other is going to about cancel each other out. All right, Zach, what's next?
All right, one more here from Troy Wansing. What are y'all thoughts on Babson? 4 losses, but also beat Worcester and Trinity all in 1 week. Yeah, Matt, we've talked about this. think we both have been very impressed by Babson, especially what they've done recently. And just to add, one more thing, we this was our game of the week last week with Trinity and Babson, and that might have looked a little bit interesting given that Babson entered the game with a 6-4 record. But Matt, that 6-4 record was enough to impress the D3 Datacast computer to have Babson ranked number 11 going into that game, and then I think the result that they pulled off, going to double overtime but getting that win, kind of validated that Babson is really good. They followed up a really good win at Worcester with a really good win, home win against Trinity, Connecticut, and kind of validating what the computer was seeing despite some losses.
Yeah, I'm currently voting for Babson now. I think they're great. I think the Babson we've seen these last few weeks is great. I think they're about as good as anyone in the country. So if we can keep seeing this Babson, I think that maybe they struggled out of the gate a little bit, but if we keep seeing this team, I think they're great.
And Matt, I think we've talked about Ashton Price a little bit
Yeah.
in the past. He's missing some time due to injury for Worcester. Do you evaluate that sort of thing when you're voting in the top 25? Any impact on how you view Worcester in light of them missing an important player?
Yeah, I try not to, let's say, drop a team immediately when all I hear is news of a player being out. Even, heaven forbid, the tragedy with Trine, with Fred Garland being killed, passing away. I didn't just immediately drop Trine because a star player is no longer going to be with them. With any sort of player being out, especially this point in the season, the proof is going to be in what happens, right? If they're going to lose games, then I'll start dropping them. I might be more quick to react the other way. So speaking specifically about Price, if Worcester starts playing a little bit more ho hum in general, and then he comes back and all of a sudden they're great, I might be faster to move them back up if I know that now their team is different. So I won't make too much of a change on a player being out. It's not like I'm going to, if Worcester dropped like 3 games, it's not like I'm going to hold him in the top 25 because they have a player out. Like, I don't know if he's coming back or when he's coming back. It's hard to keep track of all these hundreds of teams, all the injuries in general. The high profile teams and high profile players, hopefully I'll know about, at least to some degree, but I'm not going to, I try not to change teams too much right away when I hear something until a loss or two bears it out, and then I'll adjust, just like I would if they were still playing. If they're playing playing poorly and they get a player back from injury, then maybe yes, I'll be quicker to pull them back in, knowing that they're back to full strength.
All right, that wraps up this week's mailbag. Matt, we love the mailbag. We love reacting to what viewers have for us. If you have something for us to react to in a future mailbag, you can leave it on a comment on YouTube on this episode, or you can find us on social media, send us a message there, and we'd love to react. But that wraps it up for this episode. One more thing to do, Matt. We need to thank our great supporters who have joined us to support us financially through Patreon at patreon.com/D3Datacast. These people make it possible for us to do what we do on a weekly basis and a daily basis with D3Datacast.com. All the computer rankings, all the NPI information is there, updated daily without any need to log in behind a paywall or to have the or the page encumbered by ads. Thanks to our partners here, and we're grateful for
Yeah.
the growing list of people who are partnering with us in making the D3 Datacast happen.
And it's been the D3 community that's given us so much fun out of this experience of creating the show, interacting with people, getting to meet people, whether it's at tournaments, at Final Four in Fort Wayne the last couple of years. Zach, I got to interact with a great supporter of the show, great friend of the show, at Calvin versus St. Norbert's game on Saturday, just meeting a person for the first time that we've interacted over social media with. And that kind of thing is fun. We've done it at the Great Lakes Invitational and, like I said, the Final Four. And it's people like this that support our show directly that also make it special. So thank you very much for joining us in another episode and partnering with us in this endeavor, Zach. And for today, we're going to say,
Good job,
good
team.
job, team.